Kane Parsons' Backrooms and Curry Barker's Obsession have taken the film world by storm in 2026, amassing hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. Backrooms is currently the highest-grossing film in A24's catalog, ushering in Gen Z's Hollywood breakthrough. The original idea behind the concept of the Backrooms stemmed from this 4chan post on May 12, 2019, in which the following text reply accompanies the now-famous photo of a liminal hallway. If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the Backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you. The pervasive, all-encompassing horror within Backrooms is reliant on the uncanny, specifically conjured by the strangeness of liminal spaces, which are pre-existing places characterized by present human abandonment, resulting in a feeling of malleable nostalgia. Liminal spaces have cemented themselves in the digital ecosystem, often rearing their heads on short-form content platforms like Instagram Reels and TikTok, integrating themselves in the cultural zeitgeist. The paradoxical individualization and eventual shared viewing history of a person's social media algorithm bears resemblance to a lost collective consciousness. Although we have never visited these specific places, our absence is a shared experience reliant on an improbable sense of familiarity within the emptiness. Kane Parsons' found footage analog horror series channels this sentiment through its 24-episode run, utilizing the 3D software Blender to craft the setting. Premiering in 2022, it has since become a keystone of internet culture, inspiring countless alternate reality games, known as ARGs, of a similar nature, many of which take advantage of their medium specificity. While the show places heavy emphasis on the ASIC Research Institute, also featured at the beginning and end of the movie, Parsons' feature film centers on a furniture store owner named Clark and his therapist Mary. As you'd expect, it personalizes the web series' themes, expanding on the psychological nature that manifests within the self-referential nature of liminality. The inventive production design alludes to a manifestation of failed anticipatory repetition. Texture, whether that be in visual or sonic form, is the key ingredient to the existential dread that permeates the Backrooms. By operating outside the traditional modes of production, Backrooms resists the neat satisfaction of the three-act structure, setting forth and subsequently shattering its narrative arc, offering little resolution. In comparison to Obsession, which seemed to be less divisive in terms of widespread reception, possibly in collective agreement with John Carpenter's disdain for elevated horror, Backrooms takes a distant approach when establishing diegetic textual interpretation, a conscious choice one would expect of a film similar to that of an ARG. I won't use the buzzwords A24 coded to convey my appreciation for the film, because that in of itself is a rather weak defense mechanism. Instead, I want to propose an alternative framework in analyzing Backrooms, where the so-called character and plot deficiencies raise a false lack of depth, coercing one towards the richness of its non-textual elements instead. At the core of my reading lies the concept of hauntology. Parsons' collaborative soundtrack with Ido van Bremen can be categorized under a genre titled hauntology. The following definition will set forth a broad understanding of its place in the experimental music canon. Rate Your Music states, hauntology in reference to music is a broad genre unified by its deliberately uncanny, lost, haunted sense of nostalgia. Hauntology artists focus their sense of nostalgia on mid-20th century post-war broadcast media, recorded music, film, radio, television, and its musical styles such as library music, easy listening, traditional pop, and early psychedelia, filtered through ambient techniques. The production techniques for hauntology feature studio effects such as decaying, vinyl noise, tape hiss, etc., reverb, echo, filtering, fidelity shifting, time warping, and other means to capture the grain of the recording. The instrumental palette for hauntology mainly consists of samplers, tape recorders, turntables, found sounds, and analog synthesizers. Hauntology shares overlap in style with sound collage and plunderphonics through the shared use of sound manipulation and appropriation. Evocative of retrofuturism, hauntology points toward a humanistic imprint on the ever-changing material conditions that unlock and conceal modes of artistic production. Since there's much overlap between hauntology and the following, this video qualifies as another entry in my ongoing series, The Ambient Cinema Canon, in which we discuss various forms of cinema and their relationship to the tangential musical movements or subgenres of ambient music. If this concept intrigues you, there is a playlist on my channel where you can watch the previous installments, which also delve further into some of the musical projects mentioned in this video. Ambient is well established in both the hauntological and liminal, where the past and present collide, like that of Brian Eno's explanation of the ambient concept. It seeks to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. I reference it every time when discussing ambient music. Hauntology takes a parallel approach by substituting temporality for attention. If I were to sum up the concept of hauntology in a single sentence, it would be longing for the past by dreaming of a future that never arrives. This diegetically applies to Clark's life. It is at a complete standstill. He struggles with alcoholism and is broken in the wake of his failed marriage, and the routine of nothingness sets in. The allure of what once was remains. Clark attempts to reinvigorate his attitude toward being a salesperson as he dons a pirate costume. The furniture store and the neighborhood each feature bland symmetry akin to that of the default desktop wallpaper featured on early forms of Windows XP operating systems. The quiet suburbia is soul-draining. One of the first allusions to hauntology in literary form comes from experimental writer Christine Brooke Rose's 1984 novel Amalgamemnon. As one may glean from the title, Brooke Rose's staggering intellect is rife with trickery, reliant on puns surrounding Greek myth and philosophy. This passage is where the concept is first mentioned. Meanwhile, all frontier posts will be watched by Extrapol, roadblocks will be set up everywhere, and all cars searched by international verifiers. Stunned sources close to financial sources will reveal what police sources will refuse to comment. Shadow cabinets will shadowbox with ghost writers of sources close to the treasury, and spokespersons of secret city sources will persistently deny persistent rumors from the huge headlines and the breast beatings under which truth will be arraigned as traitor to reality. Then they will launch a great dehauntological campaign. Socio-psychediologists from all over the world will measure the breast beatings and calculate their agnostications and tell us what to think of it. Her wordplay is indicative of the reconstructive manner that launches its identity in musical form, as well as Parsons's framing of literal and metaphorical echo chambers and backrooms. Indicative of technology's increasing role in the fragmenting of human agency, Clark desires structure at all costs, at the expense of reality itself. His therapy sessions with Mary stray between moments of candid honesty and restorative roleplay, representing the fragmentation of his psyche. Brooke Rose's use of play on words, dehauntological referring to deontological, mirrors Clark's path of denial and eventual apathetic acceptance of his new self in the backrooms. To elaborate, deontology is a concept pertaining to moral philosophy where standalone actions are vetted under a pre-existing set of beliefs and are subsequently judged ethically by the aforementioned rather than external consequences. Clark's eventual acceptance of his new life is self-inflicted and driven by autonomy, yet Mary and the audience share the belief that it is inherently wrong, opposing the very meaning of human existence. This is apparent when Clark brings Kat and Bobby to explore the backrooms, inadvertently leading to their disappearance. I view this as a physical manifestation of Clark's willingness to accept help on the surface, only to reject it outright when the onus of improvement rests on him. Backrooms' soundtrack manages to stray away from the commonalities of conventional musical horror techniques via the rejection of the crescendo. Take two iconic horror themes, Jaws and Halloween. They each arm bursts of repetition reliant on placing the viewer and spectator in a position where one is aware of the presence that stalks and imminently looms. Ambient suspense in hauntology is rather subtle in comparison. The dread that sets in here is agentic, rooted in a denial of what may exist around the corner, marked by apathy if this potential being appears. Cat System Corp's 2016 project, News at 11, is a concept album that takes place in a world where the 9/11 attacks are erased from collective memory. I've always found the distinction between vaporwave and hauntology to be illuminating, since both employ consistent use of analog-based sampling and manipulation of digital field recordings. Think of this album in relation to Clark's television ads. The work is an ode to the incomprehensible number of hours lost to lack of preservation. Individual effort remains unnoticed, and the audience is left unaware as to how many people actually watch his work. It becomes clear that the backrooms are distorted versions of memories, propped up via a farcical system of logic, existing to uphold a supposed sense of order. In the store, every piece of furniture is aligned with a purpose, spaced out with walkability in mind. Since no one arrives, the arrangement is rendered hauntological, for the absence of a presence necessary for its very function marks it so. However, the backrooms do not function like this. Every piece of furniture or possible pathway is built into the environment, resulting in a kaleidoscopic blend of collapsible reality, rendered strange with human presence. I categorize much of American musician William Basinski's work as hauntology in its minimalistic form. Starting in the 1980s, Basinski recorded music from sound-found sources stemming from his decision to record on magnetic tape. Upon discovering the initial tape loop recordings 2 decades later, he noticed they began to deteriorate upon attempting to transfer them to a digital format. This endless cycle of decay is apparent upon replay, especially through the use of reel-to-reel tape recorders. Each passage of the tape's head marks the permanent transition a step further, slightly altering the sound each time. This technique would serve as the basis for what many consider to be Basinski's magnum opus, the disintegration loops. Split into 4 separate projects, the series also serves as an elegy to the 9/11 attacks. The first project is accompanied by Basinski's footage of the day, while a singular loop decays upon the repeated tape maneuver. These 2 projects frame hauntology from a political perspective, alluding to the core idea of lost futures. Recollection from a material standpoint alters the art itself, as well as its non-textual function. French philosopher Jacques Derrida officially coined the standalone term of hauntology in its philosophical form in his 1993 work titled Specters of Marx. The title is in reference to a line from the Communist Manifesto in which Friedrich Engels states, "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism." Derrida writes, "Repetition and first time. This is perhaps the question of the event as question of the ghost. What is a ghost? What is the effectivity or the presence of a specter? That is, of what seems to remain as ineffective, virtual, insubstantial as a simulacrum? Is there, between the thing itself and its simulacrum, an opposition that holds up? Repetition and first time, but also repetition and last time, since the singularity of any first time makes of it also a last time. Each time it is the event itself. A first time is a last time, altogether other, staging for the end of history. Let us call it a hauntology." This state of being exists in Backrooms by way of demented mimicry. Clark must continue his facade while his financial and personal prospects crumble. He insists on being a real architect, and we clearly see his talent within the makeshift blueprints he designs upon revisiting the Backrooms. Further playing into the self-referential nature of the term, the word itself is only mentioned 3 times throughout the entire text. No specific guidelines are given to the reader by Derrida, further shrouding a massive concept in an already dense text. Aided by the eeriness of sounds reminiscent of lost field recordings, the illustrative settings hammer home the perpetual urban waste that undergoes decay. It is within the personalized nature of the Backrooms where physical manifestations of lost futures arise. Mary's occupational duty as the therapist can be viewed as an attempt to confront her past self, ultimately coming to terms with the trauma left in the wake of being raised by an agoraphobic mother. There are a couple of direct references in the film to Leyland Kirby, best known for his work as the caretaker. Aside from Brian Eno and Aphex Twin, those in the music community regard Kirby to be the most well-known artist who releases work within the ambient and hauntology genres. The nearly 7-hour-long project, Everywhere at the End of Time, is considered to be his magnum opus, and the track B1, All That Follows Is True, plays in the scene after Clark chokes Mary unconscious, leading her to have a vision of her mother in a hospital. Everywhere at the End of Time is split into 6 separate stages, each of which represents a dementia patient's experience over time as the disease progresses. Playing to the ambitions of a concept album, the necessary implementation of sampling in the genre illustrates how direct borrowing from the past, in this case classical ballroom recordings, remains to be a generational plea for reinvention. The external analog effects added to the archival soundscapes parallel the occupational choices of Clark and Mary, alluding to their internal desire for healing. Successful therapeutic and architectural work requires unwavering commitment to both control and a constant self-reinventive process. The blue tape marked on the entrance is reminiscent of one of the final stages' cover art, where the painting is turned around to represent dementia at its finality. In author Simon Reynolds' 2010 book, Retromania, Pop Culture's Addiction to Its Own Past, he writes, "A pun on ontology. In French, hauntology and ontology sound almost the same because the H isn't pronounced." The concept allowed Derrida to use the philosophically problematic figure of the ghost, neither being nor non-being, both presence and absence simultaneously. The original 4chan post discussed earlier contained specific nomenclature to the Backrooms, specifically with the use of the phrase no-clip. Parsons has cited the video game series Portal as one of his main inspirations, and the aforementioned concept is illustrated best through the gameplay. Its core mechanic consists of a portal gun that can be shot at any surface, opening a wormhole where you can enter and exit between the two portals at will. The basis of this mechanic is reliant on a reimagining of physics, ushering an early imagined possibility to physical fruition. When the player passes through the portal, they're a ghost for that imperceptible moment. In reference to the Ghostbox music label, which Reynolds describes as a shared cultural memory bank of a particular generation and nationality, it seems likely that hauntological appeal would remain constrained to a certain culture. He states, this in turn begs the question, does that mean that every country and each successive generation within that nationality will produce its own version of hauntology, a self-conscious, emotionally ambivalent form of nostalgia that sets in the play of ghosts of childhood? For instance, what would a properly American equivalent of hauntology look like? A paradoxical notion set forth by collective and personal trauma allows for the hauntological to simultaneously remain universal and esoteric. A timeless release in the ambient Americana genre, Hank and Slim released The World Turned Gingham in 2000. Deconstructive tendencies of the Western genre are laid bare here, resulting in a postmodernist pastiche indicative of what Reynolds outlines as the dialectical battle between the notion of good retro and bad retro. Think of this as limbo, a transitory period somewhere between Edward Hopper's Nighthawks and a derelict Blockbuster video store. I return to Reynolds once again. Playfully parodying heritage culture, Hauntology explores two ways to, if not resist, then perhaps bypass the no future represented by mashups and retro. The first strategy involves the rewriting of history. If the future has gone AWOL on us, those with radical instincts are necessarily forced to go back, trying to uncover alternate paths secreted inside the official narrative, remapping history to find paths not taken and peculiar but fertile backwaters adjacent to pop's official narrative. They turn the past into a foreign country. The other strategy is to honor and resurrect the future inside the past. In UK Hauntology's case, that's the eyes on the horizon optimism of the post-World War II modernists and modernizers. With hypnagogic pop, that means mangled memories and distorted ideas of the 80s. In reference to some hot new hypnagogic act, the blog 20 Jazz Funk Greats wrote, hopefully, that when the past sounds more like the future than the present does, revival becomes progressive. Much of modern film discourse surrounds the nature of intellectual property and its connection to creativity. Narratives are written about Gen Z's role in the revival of the theatrical experience, citing Parsons and Barker's success as markers of brighter days to come. Many interpret this as an ode to the inherent triumph of a solely contained originality, yet I believe that much is also owed to hauntological collaboration. Barker's sustained work as an independent filmmaker is well documented on YouTube, where his team and their films continue to garner a loyal fanbase. Parsons cannot entirely lay claim to the original idea of the Backrooms that belongs to a mixture of his web series, the creepypasta community, and a myriad of online creatives. Hauntology poses an interesting contrast to that of auteur theory, for it reinvigorates the creative process through the collaborative nature of our medium. British musician Philip Jack's seventh studio album, aptly titled Seven, was released in 2003. To me, the project is representative of the mosaic of inspiration required to harness the hauntological. Jack strikes a balance found within natural distortion's battle to break free of its limited recorded form. The ambient takes root within the grainy static, accompanied by drones of an entropic nature. I categorize this project as a form of rhythmic resistance akin to recalling the certain existence of a memory while acknowledging that it will never resurface. The instruments, as well as non-instruments, that comprise the work could have originated from any part of the globe. In Mark Fisher's 2014 book titled Ghosts of My Life, Writings on Depression, Hauntology, and Lost Futures, he ponders the inception of the term. Everything that exists is only possible on the basis of a whole series of absences, which precede and surround it, allowing it to possess such consistency and intelligibility that it does. In the famous example, any particular linguistic term gains its meaning not from its own positive qualities, but from its difference from other terms. I find this point fascinating in reference to the Backrooms. The space can only imitate human-made environments where nature is entirely absent. In the world of Fisher's capitalist realism, the ideology's dominance takes hold on the very being of what we as a species deem natural. Clark and Mary's fates are both monitored by Async, who monitor the pair as subjects under the guise of research. The new notion of normalcy is distorted by corporate interference and perceived personal failure. Back to Fisher again. Is hauntology then some attempt to revive the supernatural, or is it just a figure of speech? The way out of this unhelpful opposition is to think of hauntology as the agency of the virtual. with the specter understood not as anything supernatural, but as that which acts without physically existing. The great thinkers of modernity, Freud as well as Marx, had discovered different modes of this spectral causality. The late capitalist world, governed by the abstractions of finance, is very clearly a world in which virtualities are effective, and perhaps the most ominous specter of Marx is capital itself. I find this to be timely with the incipient rise of artificial intelligence and the discussion regarding our perception of AI psychosis, a concept very applicable to the Backrooms as a quasi-sentient being. Contrast the structural lore of the Backrooms with generative AI, where prolonged interaction results in an unhealthy cycle that erodes one's well-being. Both are human creations reliant on false sentience, seeking to delude those who engage with it. The rise of frontier models, specifically LLMs, is viewed as magic by those who fall prey to its spell. Both operate within a bubble susceptible to collapse upon self-reflection and only functioning on a combination of both purposeful and unintentional processing of a massive dataset. Think of how the Backrooms is a copy of itself, continually mimicking memories. Fisher writes in regard to the word confluence and how many artists had converged on a certain terrain without actually influencing one another. What they shared was not a sound so much as a sensibility, an existential orientation. The artists that came to be labeled hauntological were suffused with an overwhelming melancholy, and they were preoccupied with the way in which technology materialized memory, hence a fascination with television, vinyl records, audio tape, and with the sounds of these technologies breaking down. This fixation on materialized memory led to what is perhaps the principal sonic signature of hauntology, the use of crackle, the surface noise made by vinyl. Crackle makes us aware that we are listening to a time that is out of joint. It won't allow us to fall into the illusion of presence. Analog horror tropes are at their most effective when they glean from obsolete technologies that people group, despite the temporal distance between them. For example, recent generations may view both VHS players and rotary phones as retro, despite the decades between their societal implementation. This temporal muddling contributes to the overall aesthetic, where material cages imposed on media blend into one another when isolated. Fisher envisions hauntology in this manner. Not only has the future not arrived, it no longer seems possible, metastasizing as an ultimate refusal to give up on the desire for the future. One of my favorite shots in Backrooms illustrates the mimetic process of the liminal space in action, representative of an audio sample derived from itself. Cyclical innovation installs itself. Celluloid is making a comeback, our IPs pass away and revive themselves periodically. Respectively, the format and the inception of these franchises in isolation do not dictate our shared cultural response. It is precisely the opposite. My favorite novel of 2026 so far is Departures by Julian Barnes. Barnes has affirmed that Departures will be his final novel, a fact that operates in congruence with its simultaneous autofictitious and essayistic structure. Though not hauntological in the direct sense, Julian introduces a concept of an IAM, short for involuntary autobiographical memory, proposing a relevant connection to our discussion. A question: if we did have access via IAMs to what really happened in our lives, would that make autobiography and fiction writing easier or harder? I suspect they would become harder. Julian utilizes the idea of a submarine captain commanding their vessel, believing that they have control over the machinery. Paralleling that of a brain, Julian believes humanity readily falls upon the organ's deterministic tendencies, while he presumes the opposite is true. Citing the brain's true passivity, he states, "As a philosopher friend pointed out to me, the brain can't let us know everything it is processing as it goes along. That would overwhelm us, flood us with far too much information, reduce us to some quivering, whimpering animal. The brain," she went on, "only informs us on a need-to-know basis. If our engagement with cinema is limited to the authorial, textual, conventional, normalized methods of interpretation, the essence of what makes this medium special falters. It is through a dedicated awareness, a continual arming of the subconscious to resist the allure of singularity, technical proficiency in this instance, that will manifest as a response to lost futures of our cinematic experiences. I imagine IAMs to fill in the gaps where forgotten memories lie, signifying one's shifting responses to art." The end credit song in Backrooms, "The Word Becomes Flesh," is taken from Scottish duo Boards of Canada's new studio album, Inferno. To many, they are the foremost example of artists who embody the hauntological identity. 6 albums comprise their discography, all of which are essential listening. Reynolds describes them as pioneers of the hauntological approach to creating old-timey and elegiac atmospheres through the use of sound treatments suggestive of decay and wear and tear. Our cultural memories are shaped not just by the production qualities of an era, black and white, mono, certain kinds of drum sound or recording ambiance, etc., but by subtle properties of the recording media themselves, photographic or film stock that screams 70s or 80s, for instance. These properties include the medium's specific rate of decay. BOC's artificially faded and discolored textures stir up the kinds of feelings you get from watching old home movies that are speckled with blotches of color, or from leafing through a family photo album full of snapshots that are turning an autumnal yellow. It's like you're witnessing the fading of your own memories. Infernal marks the modern evolution of hauntology, signified in Backrooms by the persistent hazy feeling that remains, initiated by the all-too-perfect idyllic suburban setting. Clark's acceptance of the past only exists within the denial of a future, marked by a feeling of loss that never occurs. Mary's final purgatorial state is marked by the open-ended conclusion, with her lost futures split into multiple avenues. Ethical questions arise. How can you treat a patient with empathy if you have literal access to their minds? We are left in the dark as to the rest, with Async's corporate explanation further adding to the confusion. The film's ending marks the triumph of self-purgatory, our fundamental resistance to acknowledge what plagues a soul. Failed reinvention after failed reinvention, splitting one's ontological core, a plea for a past once tranquil. Mary's duplicated self leaves the spectator with questions that lead to one conclusion. The feeling is all that remains. First and foremost, we must help ourselves and continue to welcome the past and all that it will never bring back. I will link a personal Hauntology playlist for those looking for further listening below. I implore you to listen to any of the listed tracks in their intended album form. If you'd like to support my work, please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel. My Patreon is in the description for those who wish to fund future videos with their generosity. Thank you to my patrons, Joan, Jordan, and Joey. Thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it.